Committee of the Whole, we sit as an advisory body and not as a decision-making body this evening. There will be, at times throughout this meeting, opportunities for public input, and I just wanted to review those instructions if you're online now or calling in, that I will be acknowledging you. If you're calling in and it's your turn to speak, you use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And if you're in Zoom, staff help to bring you into the meeting so that we can hear you and see you. I'd like to begin tonight's meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is in the traditional territory of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continues to this day. So in order to get the meeting started, I would like to have a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Green, a seconder, and a seconder, Councillor Braithwaite. Any comments or questions about the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Great, carried, thank you. The second item of our meeting is adoption of committee meeting minutes. As you can see, we've been busy. We have 3 sets of minutes in front of us tonight, 2 from our special committee of the Wholes on May 6th and 16th, and then our regular meeting on May 21, so we can adopt them in a single motion. May I have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, and a seconder, Councillor Patterson. Any discussion, changes, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Great, thank you. Carried. And now to item 4 in our agenda. Tonight we have one delegation, and we are pleased to welcome Ms. Lisa Helps on behalf of BC Housing. I see that she is online. I can see her face. And Ms. Helps, would you, I'm going to turn the mic over to you in just a second. You just need to state your name and affiliation for the record, and then you have the floor. You will have up to 5 minutes for your presentation, which may then be followed up by questions from council. So please go ahead. We can see your presentation on the screen, and so I'll let you take it from there, and welcome again.
Thanks very much. I have never done this presentation in only 5 minutes, but that's what Oak Bay's council bylaw allows, so I'm going to do my best, and you have the presentation for your review after the fact. My name is Lisa Helps, and I'm here on behalf of BC Builds. And we'll probably have heard is a new housing program deliberately aimed to fill a space in the housing continuum, which has been until now left a bit untended, shall we say, and that is a focus on middle income housing. So BC Builds is meant to tackle the existing challenges when it comes to building housing, cost of land, cost of construction, interest rates, and so on. Specifically, we work on identifying low-cost land for development, bringing together landowners, developers, and speeding up project timelines, and then providing low-interest financing and grants. And really, the thrust of this low-cost land for development is partnering with just about anyone who will partner with us, whether it's a municipality, a church, a First Nation, a Girl Guide group, anyone who may have land not currently in the business of building housing, but who might like to turn that land into housing through a BC Builds partnership. Our focus to start is on renters. Our aim is to have thousands of new homes under construction over the next few years. Again, targeting middle-income households. You can see there on the screen who we mean by that. And then aiming to have at least 20% of units in all buildings be 20% below market. So again, it's a rental supply program with the aim of making the buildings affordable over time by partnering with nonprofits, co-ops, First Nations, and so on. But when they start, they're regular market buildings with 20% of units at 20% below market. So renters are one target market. Second, I've touched on this, government, nonprofit, and community landowners are other key target of BC Builds. We work with land partners to unlock underutilized land, find creative opportunities to add housing on just about anything, fire hall, city hall, daycare, anything you might be building or your community entities might be building that we could put housing on top of. And then we will help to secure a development builder, a developer builder partner, and a building owner operator. And that's just a list of some of the who's there. And then finally, we partner with nonprofits and private developers and First Nations Development Corps, anyone interested in building housing. And if the building is going to be owned and operated by a nonprofit or First Nation or co-op, any non-market entity, we can provide grants into the project. So that's an overview of the who. I'm going to skip through these initial projects. We've got some on the go. All of these are community projects with housing on top of something else. This last slide here, housing on top of childcare. We work quickly in partnership with municipalities to advance projects to construction in 12 to 18 months rather than the typical 3 to 5 years outlined up top. And then finally, we've just recently launched a housing development opportunities page where we're partnering with municipalities. Anyone can partner with us, but our first 8 partners are municipalities. These municipalities across the province have zoned their sites and put them up on the housing development opportunities page and are looking for, in some cases, a developer builder partner, and in some cases, a developer builder owner operator. We do an info session for each site, and really it's an opportunity for landowners to work through BC Builds. And for those who aren't interested in or don't have the capacity to build housing, like many smaller municipalities such as Elkford and North Cowichan, this is an opportunity to leverage BC Builds to get housing built. I'll leave it there. I'm probably at 5 minutes or close to it, and happy to answer your questions, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elps. You were well under 5 minutes. You could take another one if you'd like. But anyway, thank you.
I think that's all.
Okay.
The rest of I could go back and look at the housing development opportunities site works in case you're interested in that. But I'm mostly happy to receive your questions. And good to know I can pull it off so quickly.
Very good. Thank you. So yes, I will turn to council because they may have some questions for you, and if they wish, they can draw out what you're suggesting, other aspects of your presentation or specific projects. So I'll turn to my council colleagues. Would anybody like to ask a question of Ms. Helps about this work? Thank you. I'll keep a speaker's list. Councillor Smart, please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to Ms. Helps. I'm really curious about how early a municipality should reach out to BC Builds, and should it come from, I'm gathered, the staff side. And I'm just thinking with regards to, is it important if we're looking at a few sites for a project, like to get involved, or wait till we found a particular site? Yeah, that's my first question.
Yeah, great question. So the criteria for having a municipally owned site or any community, nonprofit or government owned site, but let's just talk about municipalities for now, but you also may know a church or another community group that has land. So the key criteria is having that land zoned for what you'd like to see built there. Once the land is zoned, that's a great opportunity to begin a conversation with us. The threshold for getting a site up on the housing development opportunities page is very low. Basically, we sign an agreement between ourselves and the landowner. It says what you will do, which is provide us information about the site so that we can promote it to the development community. What we will do is get it up there, hold an info session, give yourselves an opportunity to profile the site. And some municipalities, and if I would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to go to our website, which is bcbuildshomes.ca, and you can see the variety of ways in which local governments have promoted their sites. Some just simply fill in the zoning information. Some, like the town of Elkford, have told the world why it's great to come and build in Elkford. It's up to the landowner whether you would just like to have a developer builder and you've got your own operator in mind, or you'd like to put the site out for a developer builder owner operator. But the first criteria is the land is zoned, and after that we can move pretty quickly to get it up there.
Councillor Smart, do you have a follow-up question? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just one follow-up question. Is there a minimum number of units or a minimum lot size? And just to make that question a little bit more complicated, can there be other aspects of the project? Like, can it be multi-use? Can it be a little bit more of a complex project?
Yes, all of the projects that I would have showed you and that you can see on the slide deck. The first one is City of North Vancouver. They have housing above a 3-story neighborhood house, which is going to be owned and operated by the city. The second one is in Duncan, but it's on reserve land by Cowichan tribes. They've got their tribal headquarters and Indigenous businesses on the bottom floor. And then the third one I mentioned briefly is childcare. So 2 criteria for sites where you want to and we really do want to maximize the use of public, nonprofit, and community-owned land because it's a scarce thing. So 2 criteria. One is that the non-residential portion can't be more than 30%. So BC Builds can construction finance the entire project, but not if the non-residential portion is more than 30%. And then secondly, the BC Builds financing can cover the whole construction project. And the grants, if the building is owned and operated by a nonprofit, First Nation, co-op, et cetera, non-market actor, the grants can subsidize the construction cost of the housing. But the non-residential space needs to carry itself in terms of paying the mortgage. So that can mean 2 things. One is, we're working with a municipality that is, well, actually the city of North Vancouver, they are funding through MFA borrowing. I think it's $30 million for their 3-story neighborhood house. So they're putting that money in. But there are other places that we're working with where they are going to lease out the bottom floor to, in one case, a provincial office, and that provincial office will pay their lease rates to cover the mortgage costs. So the key with non-residential space is that it needs to carry itself in the project. The housing, the rents paid by renters and the construction grants through BC Builds can't cover the non-residential portion.
Thank you. I have Councillor Appleton and then Councillor Patterson. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you, I want to thank Ms. Helps for attending, and I really appreciate this presentation. Just wanted to speak to the question I have is with respect to relative land values. One of the obstacles or one of the impediments that we often get cited in Oak Bay is just the relatively high land value and how that sort of drives towards the highest and quote unquote highest and best land uses and those types of things, and it tends to narrow the spectrum of opportunities. So I'm just wondering, in the implementation of your program, what has been the experience in terms of incentivizing or otherwise providing some sort of framework that helps, I guess, address that or tries to, we do want to provide opportunities for lower costs and affordable housing in Oak Bay. But the land value piece and the historical zoning piece is a bit of an impediment to that. So I was wondering if you might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's exactly what BC Builds is actually leveraging. So by partnering with landowners like municipalities or nations or churches or whomever, they put their land into BC Builds on a long-term lease basis. So first of all, no one's giving away their land, which I know from my former role is really important. We don't want to give away public land. So the land comes into BC Builds projects on a long-term lease basis, but it also comes in at nominal value. So we're not paying any of the landowners for their land. What that means is 2 things. One is the land lease contribution. I'll just talk about municipalities because we're talking in a municipality right now. So the land lease contribution of the municipality counts as the landowner's contribution, equity contribution to the project, but it actually, there's no money that changes hands. And that's one of the ways that we're lowering construction costs through BC Builds. Land comes in at nominal value. So in essence, the land cost disappears from the project, even though the land value is still there for the municipality. And then we have got low cost construction financing, low cost takeout financing, and then grants to help reduce the construction cost. So BC Build is meant to grapple with exactly what you've asked, that question about land value. So in essence, it comes in at 0 and helps to reduce the construction cost, but you're not selling it or giving it away. And the equity contribution from the local government is counted in the project pro forma.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you to Ms. Helps. Thank you very much for attending and sharing this with us tonight. So based on what I have heard here, then you're looking at the longer-term sustainability of affordable housing based on the nominal value of the land, perhaps securing expertise in operating or managing the facility on a longer-term basis. What about the site servicing to the lot? Where do you look to gain concessions or efficiencies of cost on servicing the lot?
Well, generally, we would assume that I'm not sure I totally understand the question, because in most, I mean, I'm assuming in Oak Bay, most lots have municipal services running to them. Is that the case?
Well,
Yes, but land is serviced, and we have an ongoing program to maintain the infrastructure. If there were some new development, there are some parcels in Oak Bay that would not have services to them yet, and they would have to be added. I can think, for example, what do we call the Cedar Hill Crossroads corner, which is land in UVic land, which is unserviced at the moment.
Yeah, so I think the cost of servicing land can be, I guess, incorporated into the project budget, the construction project budget. But then what that could do, if the costs are too high, is make that project non-viable. So, yeah, the UVic one, I mean, that's a giant site, and I think would probably be very palatable to the development community to pay for the servicing costs in exchange for getting to develop that land. So yeah, BC Builds doesn't explicitly service unserviced lots, but it's part of the construction pro forma analysis to see what those costs would be, and does it make sense to service lots, and would the project still be viable? But another kind of aspect of your question is, I don't know, say there's a lot where the servicing is only enough to service a certain amount of density on the site, and more density would be added through a BC Builds building. That additional servicing would be paid for through the project, but that's different than servicing an unserviced lot.
Thank you.
And actually, sorry to interrupt. That made me just remember that I didn't answer Councillor Smart's question, I think, in its entirety, which is there a certain size or minimum or certain density that we would like to see? BC Builds wants to be respectful of local area plans and official community plans. And when we're using public land, we hope that the public or community or nonprofit landowner would want to do as much with their land as possible. So we want to maximize the density within what's acceptable to an OCP or local area plan.
Thank you. Any other councillors who would like to ask a question of Ms. Helps? No, I don't see any. I guess I just have one myself, if I may. I just going forward, I know that we're at a period right now, Ms. Helps, when we're looking back at projects that were affordable and coming to the end of their sort of government-supported life, and it's creating issues across Canada. Even as you design this program, are you taking a long view to what's going to happen at year 35 or 40 in these developments that you're partners to, in terms of what's happening to the buildings and the tenancies at that point in time?
Yeah, we sure are. So BC Builds is designed, unlike other government-funded housing, there is no ongoing operating subsidy. So there will never be a period where the subsidy comes to an end. These buildings are meant to stand on their own from the very beginning, which means when we're partnering with nonprofits or co-ops or other non-market housing actors, that as the building is, as the mortgage is paid off, they have discretion as to what they do with the operating surplus that they'll be generating, and they can use it to lower rents, they can use it to invest in other affordable housing or non-market housing in the area. Our expectation when we give grants is that the 20% of units at 20% below market will remain in place for 35 years. But in essence, these are just like regular apartment buildings. They're not subsidized, and so we're building sustainability in right from the very beginning.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes what we'd like to ask you. We thank you again for coming and presenting. We do have your deck, so we have that presentation in our record now. And I just think, again, I appreciate your time and wish you well. I imagine you're going around, we are making many of these presentations around BC. So,
Sure am.
yeah, a fuerte to you, Ms. Helps. And I just, to close this out, I suppose I should request a motion to formally receive this delegation for information. Thank you, Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Appleton. All in favor? Thank you very much. And so we'll bid you a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks for your time this evening, and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. We now move to item 5 on the agenda, which are Mayor and Council's verbal reports. I think I'll ask the Mayor to go first, and then maybe we could go around the table counterclockwise, starting with Councillor Patterson. And so these will be updates since our last updates at the Committee of the Whole on May the 21st. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Mayor Murdoch.
Sure, I have it, my notes, and I don't know where I put them in my shuffle over here, so I'll just, no, it's okay, I'll just wing it a little bit here. I do have a chance to update it every meeting, obviously, with the Mayor's report, so I would like to just congratulate the BIA for both the inaugural first of the year night market, as well as the spring nosh, which was held at the western end of Oakway Avenue on the weekend. Also, just some volunteers that went and helped clear out Carling Point, and other councillors may want to speak to that as well. And the only other thing I think it probably worth noting is the long-term beneficial use plan for biosolids was approved at the CRD, so that'll go to the province for review and so forth. So that's been a very difficult file for a long time now. It certainly doesn't get to a long-term resolution, but it certainly lays out the path where there's a preferential order of pieces starting with energy use and then following its way down at the very end to land application and some very specific components. So I think that's pretty much it for my updates. And if I think of anything else, I'll do it next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it's always a little bit difficult to remember from the last time we came together on this, but certainly as my council liaison duties, I attended the Advisory Planning Commission meeting on May 22nd. And on May 11th, I attended the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee reception for our resource agencies. The resource agencies are really the folks that do the hard work on the ground. They're out there representing youth and families throughout the region. We had 21 representative of those agencies attending the meeting, and it's really informative to find out what is happening. Some of the information is difficult to hear, but nevertheless really important. And that was followed by the committee's meeting on May 23rd. Coming out of that, it is really with great sadness that I announce that Adam Flint, the View Royal resident and the vice chair of the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, died suddenly on May 13th. He was 47 years of age, so it came as quite a shock to all of us. Adam was a fierce advocate for children and youth and was active with the committee since 2018. He was also an executive member of the Movember campaign, a campaign that raises awareness and funds for men's health. And we will really miss him. I found Adam to be kind, funny, and a very thoughtful individual. A memorial service is planned for him on June 29th, and certainly I will be attending as council liaison and the treasurer for the committee. On June 24th, I attended the volunteer appreciation reception at the Monterey Center. And once again, at this acknowledgement of all of the hard work they do was fabulous food, fabulous music, and wonderful conversation. And really, for those who aren't aware of it, I think Monterey Center is a well-kept secret of good food in the district, and certainly the chef and volunteers put on a wonderful presentation for us. So it was a great afternoon. I attended, of course, on May 31st with other people at the table, the farewell for former police chief Mark Fisher and swearing in for Chief Julie Channon. And as our liaison to CREST, the emergency communications, on behalf of the board, I also gave our thanks to Chief Julie Channon now, who was, she chaired the our committee of the emergency responders within the region. So we will definitely miss her in that capacity, but wish her well in her new role with the District of Oak Bay. And then, of course, I attended the night market on Wednesday with many of the other folks in the Oak Bay. It was luckily a great evening. We'd had gale force winds the evening before, but that got settled down for that evening. And once again, good showing of participants in the booths. We saw many of our volunteer groups and some of the Oak Bay District staff at booths in the village. So I think it was a good turnout, and certainly the nosh on Saturday was also well attended. So I think everybody has had wonderful food and entertainment for the week, and it was appreciated by all. I noticed we also did receive from Councillor Braithwaite the annual report from the BIA, and I read that, and it really does speak to all of the hard work throughout the year that they do. So they certainly deserve our thanks, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. You've had a busy few weeks. Over to you, Councillor Smart.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This month, I had the opportunity to attend the BC Hydro information session to hear about plans for increasing our electrical capacity in the future, as well as a full-day transportation workshop hosted by the CRD. I also attended a regular Arts Commission meeting where they released the impact report, which was such a fantastic document. Also attended a reconciliation event hosted by Community Association of Oak Bay at the United Church, and other great community events such as the Evening of Dance at Oak Bay High. And I wanted to thank those residents who did show up to volunteer to clear invasive species from the Chinese cemetery and the adjacent rocky point at Harling Point. And there will be one more session. So if anybody's interested in coming out to volunteer, they can reach out to me and I can put them in touch with the volunteers. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for that offer, Councillor Smart. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much. Just like to thank my alternate, Councillor Green, on the Parks, Rec and Culture Committee meeting for attending the committee meeting in May for me. I did attend the BIA AGM and have, as you've heard, distributed the annual report via email to everyone. I was also at the change of command, and I also attended the Coast Capital Purpose Panel to hear about the work that they're doing with a number of nonprofits in our community, including Threshold Housing, which was really interesting. And I represented Oak Bay at the Canadian Pool Life Saving Championships, along with the Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, the Honourable Lana Popham, and attended a lunch put on by BC Hydro where we discussed electrification for our province and BC Hydro's capital plan, which was really interesting. And then one thing that I got to do this month, which was wonderful, was attend a convocation ceremony at UVic where I was able to see our own Margaret Litke from Friends of Uplands Park receive an honorary Doctor of Science degree. It was really wonderful to be able to witness her receiving that for all that she does in the community. It was really, really well deserved. Also attended a meeting for the planning of the centennial celebration for the Stanley Cup being won in Oak Bay, so stay tuned for more information on that. The first market of the season, and then I helped organize the broom pull at the Chinese cemetery on Saturday, and in actual fact they found a gravestone hidden under some of the broom that was pulled that they had not realized was there. So, and as Councillor Smart said, I'm working on getting another date put onto the calendar for another clearing. And of course the Spring Nosh, which if any of the rest of you were there, it was really good food, and look forward to that every year. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go last. So Councillor Appleton, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. I feel like I've covered less ground than my colleagues this month. I will speak primarily to my role as chair of the Greater Victoria Public Library Board. I chaired the regular meeting on May 28th. At this time of year, the GVPL board deals with very similar matters to what council itself is dealing with. Our annual audit, statement of financial, and basically all of the matters to wrap up the previous year's budget and begin the New Year's planning process as well. I also, as chair, attend ex officio to all of the other committee meetings. So the Finance Committee meetings, the Planning and Policy Committee meetings have also happened this past month, and a special working group struck to deal with strategic planning. And with respect to the overall business of the Greater Victoria Public Library, my colleagues will note that our counterparts in Saanich are considering a proposal tonight for a new facility and a new building on the Nellie McClung Library site. So they are deliberating that, I think, as we speak. So the proposal is for a renewed library on the Nellie McClung site in conjunction with affordable housing. So an exciting proposition, and one that we'll see the outcomes of that discussion. But certainly, that particular library branch being extremely well attended, actually the most well attended branch in terms of transactions in the entire system, including the main branch downtown. So obviously of significant interest, not just to Saanich residents, but also folks from, obviously draws people from North Oak Bay as well, and is a resource for our community as well. So we await the results of that deliberation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
As mentioned by my colleague, Councillor Braithwaite, thank you for that. I attended the Parks and Rec committee meeting on May the 28th. On May the 25th, I attended a workshop, 4-hour workshop on reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, and that was, as someone mentioned, sponsored by the Community Association of Oak Bay in cooperation with Reconciliation Oak Bay. May the 27th, I attended the South Island Reconciliation Advisory Committee meeting in Souk with our CAO. We attend those meetings together, and that's always fun, driving the Souk Highway. I then attended the D-Day Cenotaph celebration, June the 6th, with my colleagues and members of our police department, fire department, and other special guests. And I've had 3 coffee meetings and 1 telephone meeting with residents. So I also became ill in between, so I missed some very important events, sadly. One was the swearing-in ceremony for our new chief of police, Julie Shannon, and I was very sad to miss that. And there was another event that I missed as a result of being ill, so my apologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As the public and staff and the community can hear, there are so many things going on in this community, and it's really a privilege as councillors to be able to attend them, to represent the municipality there. And I thank all of council for all the energy used to do that and to stay connected and to follow what's going on and support it. I sort of will make an excuse for myself. I was actually away and out of the country at a family celebration in the UK, so I didn't probably do as much for council in the last few weeks as I normally would, but I was able to attend on my return Oak Bay Volunteer Services AGM and to hand out long service awards or pins to and quite a number of volunteers, the longest of whom had been doing this for, I think I handed out some 30-year pins. They're just going into they're in their 46th year now of operation. So that was just pretty phenomenal, a very well attended event, and lovely to see them under the leadership of their new CEO, Cara Udell, who appears to be doing just a very good job of supporting the community in some new programs as well as maintaining the old ones. June the 5th, I was at the Heritage Commission as council liaison, the advisory design panel on June 11th, where we had a very full agenda. This past Saturday, was fortunate to spend part of the day, I couldn't attend the whole thing, but sponsored by the Heritage Foundation, a workshop on the preparation of statements of significance, which was led by Livewire Heritage consultant Katie Cummer. It was a very worthwhile event, and pretty much everybody at the foundation and the Heritage Commission was able to attend that and learn how that tool is developed and used. And then yesterday afternoon, it was lovely to attend in the community Jazz Evensong at St. Mary's. That was the last of those jazz concerts combined with Evensong for this particular year. It was the John Miller Quartet. He's a favorite of mine. And just wanted to let the community know that the fall 2024 lineup is already announced. And so there's lots more to look forward to on that musical front. And also, just before I close, I just wanted to flag for everyone's information in the community. I think council is aware that this coming Wednesday, there's going to be a special performance event at Oak Bay United Church, hosted or sponsored by Reconciliation Oak Bay, where Rai Moran, who it turns out, I didn't know this, musician, poet, writer, speaker, is going to be providing creative stimulus through an event called Hope Through Adversity, an evening of truth and reconciliation with Rai Moran. So that starts at 7:30 this coming Wednesday evening at Oak Bay United Church. And I think that concludes, thank you for your patience, everybody, that concludes this portion of the agenda where we let you know what we've been up to. So now we will move to item 6, which is public comment and question period. I don't see anybody online or calling in, but there may be people in the audience, and I just wanted to let you know this is an opportunity for members of the public in attendance or online to address council regarding topics that directly impact the community. It is not an opportunity for you to address an item that's on the agenda that's subject to public input. We do have one item tonight that is subject to public input. That's the review of home-based business. So if you're here to speak about that, this is not the moment. You will get an opportunity when the time arises when we're dealing with that item. But if there's anybody else here who would like to come and speak to us, please come forward now. And you would just need to turn on the mic, identify yourself, you give us your name and your where you live, and then you've got 3 minutes to address us on any matter of concern or interest. I don't see anybody rising. All right. Well, thank you. And I don't see anybody online. No, Tom, nobody that I should know about, nobody calling in. All right. Thank you very much. So that dispenses with item number 6. So now we can move to perhaps the biggest meaty item of our agenda tonight, which is item 7.1. This is subject to public input. It's a review of home-based business regulations. And we have Deputy Director Brian Green. I understand that you will be making a presentation, and perhaps also you have the consultant who will be joining us. I don't know, but I'm going to turn the meeting over to you, Mr. Green, and you can take us away. Thank you.
So this report is a review of home-based business regulations, which responds to Council's direction from June of 2022. That direction directed staff to come back to council with options for home-based businesses, and which at that time was a council priority project. This project was operationalised on December the 14th of last year, of 2023, and removed from the priority plan, with the project to be completed by staff when time permitting. So this review was actually initiated in the summer of last year, when we had fortunate to have a co-op planning student undertake some research on options, as well as doing a little bit of a review of other municipalities and their home-based business regulations. And then we handed that research over to a planning consultant that we appointed. So we appointed Bridget Reynolds of Compass Rose Planning, who is with us this evening to give us a broader presentation. And so we appointed Bridget to do that complete review, which is being presented to you this evening. So the consultant's reports provides a detailed review of home-based business regulations, including the existing regulations as well as options for council's consideration. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Bridget, who will walk us through the presentation and walk us through the report that is attached to council's report this evening. Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Reynolds. Yes,
thank you very
go
much,
ahead.
and thank you, Brian, and nice to be here with committee and all committee chair and councillors. So yes, I had the honor of working with the planning department to putting together this report on home-based business, and so there we go. So just briefly, a bit of an agenda for today. I'll touch on the current home-based business regulations and also just reference the importance of home-based businesses in Oak Bay's economy. And then also touch briefly on the comparative review that we did with looking at 7 different local governments. And take a look at the sort of the different scope of amendments, because there's 25 amendments, proposed amendments in total, and they range in terms of sort of complexity and depth and detail. And speak to the affected bylaws, and then hand it back to staff, and they're going to discuss the possible options that committee and council may choose to move forward on this. So first up, this is just a quote from the Honourable Francois-Philippe Champagne. He's the Minister of Innovation and Science and Industry. And this had to do with the 2024 federal budget. And so here he's referencing, of course, the importance of small businesses federally, but we also, need to recognize the importance of them provincially and certainly locally, because they do play a really important role for our communities. And Brian already spoke to this in terms of this being one of council's, a directive from council that originated in 2022, and really coming out of, the changing nature of employment and home-based businesses in our economy with the pandemic. So taking a look at the current regulations for the district. So the district in the zoning bylaw is actually referred to as a residential business use, and that differs from certainly from what the OCP refers to it as well as what a lot of other local governments reference for home-based business. It's permitted as a secondary use in 17 different zone districts, both single-family and multifamily, and one mixed-use zone district. The regulations, one is require a landlord consent is required for a tenant who wants to operate a home-based business. The bylaws permit 2 businesses in one dwelling unit and allows for 1 non-resident employee. The bylaw doesn't allow for any visitors or any visitations or customers to the dwelling, but there are some exceptions for music lessons and additional sort of supplementary tuition is what the reference is. And then as far as there are a number of things that are specifically not permitted, and one being the sales and display of merchandise, no deliveries except for mail, no signs are permitted, and of course nuisance is not permitted, and that's pretty standard across the board. And the bylaw doesn't require any parking as well. And I forgot to mention that with the adoption of with the province of the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act last year, staff thought it important to roll that into this report because it has implications for home-based business, and then it's also, advising committee and council as to what the implications are for that new piece of legislation for the district. So there are 5 bylaws. So should amendments, should council decide to move forward with amendments to the home-based business regulations, these 5 bylaws would potentially have to be amended. So I'm not going to go into sort of what those changes might be, getting into a level of detail that I don't think we want tonight. So here we're touching on the, looking at the business license, the left-hand chart, apologies, I know it's a little hard to read, but you see on the left-hand side that's referencing all the business licenses that were issued in 2023. And the three largest categories were for consultants, contractors, and retail use. And in 2023, there was a total of 591 business licenses issued by the district. And then we take a look on the right-hand side, the home-based businesses last year that the types of licenses that were issued, or the categories of businesses that were issued for home-based business. Not surprisingly, the two highest ones were also consultants and contractors, and then the third one was for home office or professional office. And that, of course, is reflective of the regulation itself and what it allows. With the business license data from 2023, we see that 40% of Oak Bay businesses are in fact home-based businesses. So, they obviously do play a significant role for the local economy. And then when we look at the figure on the right, that is census data for 2021. So what that reflects is that 26% of Oak Bay workers were self-employed. So they may or may not be have a home-based business within Oak Bay. It could be located elsewhere, for example. And what this was a 5% increase from the previous census in 2016. What's also important to note with this figure is that it's actually 9% greater than the numbers of workers who are self-employed in the Victoria Census Metropolitan Area and the province of BC. So again, we're seeing that home-based businesses or self-employment is playing an really quite important role here in the District of Oak Bay. And there's some broader-based sort of positive implications associated with people who are working at home, in that it is also helping to reduce community greenhouse gas emissions, for example. We then also see more efficient use of buildings and community infrastructure. And then more people tend to be utilizing or relying on local area businesses and services, which is then can be, kind of compounding. So we looked at 7 different local governments. Most of them are from Vancouver Island, and similar in context to Oak Bay in terms of smaller communities, small urban context. We looked at a couple of other ones, but there was some that had more of an agricultural context, which of course is less applicable here. And some of the things that we were looking at in doing the review is recognizing the importance that when looking at regulations generally, the enforceability of these regulations. Oftentimes there's a desire to create regulation that covers many different bases, but they can be very challenging to enforce, for example. Another consideration is sometimes, bylaws or regulations, there's some conflict between bylaws. One bylaw, one regulation might have been originated 20 years ago, and another relevant regulation gets changed, but they're not both brought up to date. And so you have that internal conflict. That can create problems. So hence going back to the 5 different bylaws that need to be reviewed. Also need to be thinking about is the bylaw or is the regulation, is it being effective in terms of achieving the end goal? And then of course the importance of balancing so many different objectives that council has to balance as part of their work. So when looking at, for example, something like this, you're trying to increase opportunities for home-based businesses. People are likely to be concerned about what the impacts might be in their neighborhood, for example, and how, parking might be an issue. But then, of course, council has also identified or prioritized reducing corporate and community greenhouse gas emissions, for example, or prioritizing active transportation. So it's just as moving forward with any amendments that, recognizing these balancing objectives become very important as part of the community conversation with consultation. And also another consideration relates to the introduction of Bill 44 and the direction of the province to increase different types of housing. And then, you know, our home-based business opportunities allowed for in all types of potential homes that might be developed as we move forward. So then, getting into a little more detail about the scope of the developments, and again, talking from the minor, sort of the much less impactful, sort of the housekeeping type of amendments, and moving forward to those that are more detailed and more, potentially more impactful. Again, and of course, the different level of complexity. So again, you know, spoke to the definition that in itself might be an amendment that council might consider to make it consistent with the OCP and other local governments. Considering removing the requirement for the owner authorization. This really, what this does is it's not really a land use issue, you know, to be considered, and it can become a hurdle as far as just another thing that a tenant needs to deal with their landlord, and it's really a landlord-tenant issue. And sometimes in terms of expanding, trying to expand the opportunities for home-based business by adding a regulation or a requirement that the home-based business shall not result in any kind of exterior changes might provide some level of comfort to neighbors. Another consideration is establishing specific lists of businesses that are prohibited. So here, you know, the bylaw already speaks to that by not permitting manufacturing use or commercial workshop, for example. But this may want, you know, council committee may want to expand that. But then getting into being more broad in terms of identifying what businesses are permitted. So using more a category type of structure instead of specifics. Because the concern in the case of when you're permitting something and you're being very specific, it's inevitable that businesses are going to be forgotten, specific businesses. So if you keep it a little more broad to something like a home office or a personal service, then it's much easier to interpret than listing specific services. For example, a hairdresser or an esthetician is okay, but it's all under personal service. Considering permitting a small sign, something that might fit within the context of the neighborhood, no lighting, that's a common thing that is in other bylaws. And then also considering permitting home-based business in mixed-use developments, because currently that's only the case in one zone district right now. And with the changing development or the redevelopment of commercial properties, there's the likelihood of more mixed-use types of developments. So want to be recognizing that. And then, so medium scope, and just to go back with the minor scope developments, those generally, as far as community consultation, would likely, you know, because they're more housekeeping in nature, would the level of community consultation wouldn't have to be quite as intensive or quite as in-depth as when you move towards the more major scope of amendments. So here for medium scope, consideration about modifying the number of non-resident employees. That could look, for example, right now, because one is permitted, perhaps instead of just one, maybe permitting two part-time employees. Another one that's important is permitting the sale and display of merchandise, particularly the sale of merchandise, because of the nature of businesses are changing, and a lot of people are undertaking sort of resale of goods or different platforms like Etsy or Amazon or so on, and they're really just flow through, so it's considering and allowing for those kinds of uses. Because the sales, of course, are virtual. And then there are those businesses that are makers, and allowing for those types of businesses to operate as well, so, and then they're able to sell their wares. Display of goods, also, keeping that, allowing it, but not ensuring that the display is internal to the operation and not to the exterior of the building. Delivery of goods. This is one where it's really hard to distinguish between sort of the delivery of goods for a personal use versus a commercial use. So considering expanding that. And the next one, amending the childcare regulations. So though the Queenswood Consulting Group did this study back in 2020, and they made a number of different recommendations for the district to consider. And some of those are certainly important considerations because it's not really clear, some of the regulations in the various bylaws related to childcare. In one bylaw it's called daycare, in another it's called childcare. In the zoning bylaw, it's not permitted, it's not identified as a home-based business, for example, but it's in the definition, it's permitted as a public or an institutional use. So there's sort of a number of different conflicting things going on that might make it challenging for somebody to try to start up a childcare operation. And again, here, we're looking at greater impact, so therefore the consultation would necessarily require, would have to be more in depth. And then getting into the major scope, so considering for allowing visiting customers, and this would then require some level of parking or some requirements for parking, whether on site or whether allowing short-term on the street. Looking at the possibility of allowing for different types of home-based businesses in different types of buildings or housing typologies. So again, as expanding the different types of homes, dwelling units, what businesses might be suitable in, for example, a single family or an accessory dwelling unit or a duplex, a ground-oriented type of development, and then versus in a multifamily context. Oh, thanks. And then the OCP speaks directly to expanding the potential for urban agriculture, and this is an area that gains more traction because, of course, the cost of food these days and concerns around food security. So these are the last two. So here we're looking at short-term rentals and the potential there to allow for short-term rentals. So with the changing provincial regulation, currently the district clearly prohibits short-term rentals, and where that temporary accommodation is provided for a 30-day period. The provincial the Provincial Act expands that to 90 days. Pretty much the same definition, but instead of a 30 days, defines it as for a period of 90 days. And what the provincial regulation allows for is really what they're trying to do is to eliminate those whole home rentals that people are buying as investment properties and renting them out. But the provincial regulation does allow for homeowners or residents to rent out part of their home or an accessory dwelling unit, a secondary suite, as a short-term rental. And this council may want to consider this because it certainly helps to homeowners to defray some of their mortgage costs. And also there's tax revenues, there's implications because there's short-term rentals, they generate tax revenues through the municipal and regional tax program. And currently those funds fund Oak Bay tourism activities. So something to be thinking about. And then finally, looking at the potential for establishing sort of a tiered framework. So here again, as far as even looking at the scope of amendments, some of them being the least impactful to most impactful, by looking at considering a tiered structure, again, looking at some of those you know, a tier one business, for example, would be a type of business that would be the least impactful, similar to the home office where there's no visiting customers, no additional employees, and then moving towards a second tier where you know, perhaps one non-resident employees permitted, customers are permitted, but on a limited basis, parking might be required, and then moving to that third or more intensive tier where these might be considered, or one bylaw called them high traffic types of home-based businesses. And considering this tiered structure is helpful when thinking about different housing typologies and you know, where some of these businesses would be suitable in some contexts, like a single family or a ground-oriented residence versus something that's not going to be suitable in a multifamily context. So it can help sort of manage those. And another thing with this type of structure is also that this also goes to sort of the approval process, because then, you know, it's going to be a more straightforward approval process and potentially a lesser fee in the tier one type of business versus the higher tier, or the tier 3 or category 3, for example. There'd be less oversight with the home office versus the somebody who's carrying on something that one of those higher traffic type of operation. And that might also speak to, you know, then the application fees that are charged for the different types of businesses across the spectrum. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm now going to hand it to Carly.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reynolds. Don't go too far, because there will be opportunity for questions from council, and I'm sure there will be some, and we'll be speaking to you again, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Reynolds, and good evening, Mayor and members of Council. So I'm just going to walk us through the possible options that we've prepared for Council to consider. So on this slide here, we have option 1, 2, and 3 highlighted, and the next slides I'll be moving through them. So option 1 is to proceed with only minor home-based regulatory changes for, with targeted consultation. So again, as Ms. Reynolds went through, no significant changes. We would be looking at those minor scope changes, which would be focused on providing greater clarity, improved enforceability, and more effective regulations. The engagement would be focused with the Advisory Planning Commission and informing current home-based business license holders. And then the estimated timing for this would be over the course of 2024 and 2025, and the associated estimated cost for that would run from $8,000 to $10,000. If council would like to proceed with this possible option, they would direct staff to prepare minor changes to the home-based business regulations. Option 2 is to further consider home-based business regulatory changes as part of the housing-related zoning bylaw review. So this could range from minor to major amendments. Again, as was earlier highlighted in the presentation, this would be a fulsome engagement and communications plan, which would involve both in-person and online engagement. Estimated timing for that would be over the course of 2025, as already scheduled. An estimated cost would be there's already funding allocated through the Housing Action Program, but as that would be further scope, there could be further cost added to that to compensate for this additional scope. Council just would like to proceed with this option. The next steps would be to direct staff to include the home-based business regulations as part of the scope of the housing-related zoning bylaw review. Option 3 is to proceed with home-based business regulatory changes with stakeholder engagement as a standalone initiative. Again, the scope could range from minor to major amendments. Again, a fulsome engagement plan with in-person and online options and approaches. Estimated timing would depend on council direction, and the estimated cost would run from $15,000 to $20,000. Council would like to proceed with this option. The next step would be to direct staff to prepare a project backgrounder for consideration as a council priority project through that process later this year. Option 4 presented in the staff report is for council to provide an alternate direction to staff. And here we have the staff recommendation to receive the report and that council directs staff to proceed with one of the options as outlined in this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rimmel. And I know I'm going to have questions. I'll start a speakers list. Thank you for your presentations, both of you, and for the comprehensive package. A lot here to think about and to take in and think about and figure out what the way forward is. So yes, I'll start with Councillor Green and then Braithwaite.
Through you, Chair, to both of you, thank you for the presentation. Ms. Reynolds, just quickly, I wanted to ask, please, how you define a contractor or a consultant. What are the parameters or the criteria for contractor or consultant? Because they can be similar and they can be very different. Thank you. That's my first question. Thanks.
And I might need staff to confirm it, but I think really a contractor tends to be sort of that mobile type of worker where they're offering a service, they're using their home as their home office, and then they're going and working elsewhere. Whereas a consultant would be somebody who's working as out of their home office, providing services. Sort of similar to myself, I suppose, offering services to different customers and doing that kind of work.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. And then through the chair to staff, just I have 4 questions based on page numbers. And the first one is page 2, first paragraph, and the timeline identified in the first paragraph under analysis is 2021 and 2016. Did you actually mean 2021 to 2024? I wasn't sure what the timeline meant. I wonder if, would you mind clarifying that for me? Or have I misread it or misunderstood?
Through the chair, that's it's different commentary that reflects on the statistics around, particularly around the pandemic and the changes to working from home that resulted. So that paragraph does not have bearing on the next steps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that wasn't meant to say 2021 to 2024. Okay, good. Thank you very much. My second question, page 3. Regarding the commercial and retail analysis, I just wondered if any consideration had been given to the role of the Business Improvement Association in Oak Bay. Are they involved in any way? Thank you.
Through the chair, so our consultant did reach out to the BIA, and so I think Ms. Reynolds has had some discussions with the BIA, acknowledging that we haven't done any formal consultation with them. It was more just to alert them to this project and to alert them that this report would be going to council today, but we haven't done any formal consultation with the BIA as yet, and obviously that would be part of, if depending on which option council goes with tonight, that we would, depending on the level of consultation, reach out to the BIA for any comments that they may have on some of the options.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Sorry.
I believe you were also referencing the commercial and retail analysis. So the scope for that work is strictly quantitative analysis at this point, and it's not that qualitative analysis with engagement. With the idea being that that would feed into some of these other planning processes that are coming up, and then we would have opportunity to engage with the public through those.
Okay, thank you very much. On page 4, the last paragraph before options, let me just go to page 4. And that was, if council prefers to keep the topic of home-based business regulations separate from the housing-related projects, staff would bring forward a project backgrounder, etc. Should those things actually be integrated in the planning process, though, going forward? Shouldn't housing and home-based businesses be somehow connected as having a relationship with one another? Thank you. Would you mind commenting, or?
Thank you for the question through the chair. It depends what the desired focus is next year. Right now, as it stands, those projects for next year directly relate to the 20-year housing needs report that needs to be prepared and changing the OCP, but also the zoning bylaw specifically for the 20-year housing needs. So very much a housing-focused and housing-centered approach. But that said, to do that properly, we are looking at the overall land use framework for the district. We also have information coming forward about retail capacity. So there are a couple of other pieces of information that could widen the scope of review. And similarly, the home-based business topic could be rolled into that as well as part of a more wider land use review. That said, Council could also opt to squarely focus on housing only and leave this topic separately. So that's kind of the bit of a choice, and there's probably either choice is probably good from staff perspective, but that's why we have raised these two options for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And my last question on page 6, under option 1, I'm just wondering, there are comments around limited staff time and, of course, consultants' financial impacts. And I'm just wondering how our financial capacity is bearing up over time, given the tremendous pressure to, produce the housing issue as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we have the financial capacity to, one, handle consultancy or address, the need for consultancy, as well as we have the budget to do more in-depth work. Thank you. And those are my questions.
Let me see. I think for the housing projects, we have confirmed a separate budget source. However, if we combine home-based business with that work, we need to look at the cost and the funding source. That goes for option 2 and 3. For option number 1, we do have a yearly consultant budget that the department relies on for smaller initiatives. And that's why the year is 2024-2025. There's a couple of other things on the go already. And that budget is, I believe, 40,000, so it doesn't carry that much. So we need to review, after a couple of the other topics have been completed later this year, whether we have sufficient funding available under option 1 to continue this right away or to continue it next year. Thank you.
I really appreciate all the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. In my speakers list, I have Braithwaite, Patterson, Appleton, and Murdoch in that order. Before I turn to Councillor Braithwaite, I just want to say to any members of the public in the audience who would like to speak to this matter, once Council, I just wanted to let you know, if you're out there and you want to do that, once Council has finished asking questions, we will be turning to you and giving you an opportunity to come and speak to us at that point. So we haven't forgotten about you. We're just not there yet.
Thanks so much. A couple of things. On the options, the difference between option 2 and option 3, there's a big cost difference between option 2 and option 3. And is that because option 3 is a standalone and not kind of put into the housing action program?
Yeah, through the chair, that's at this point, it's estimate. I think option 3 provides our current estimate for this project. If it were standalone, if it were rolled into the existing or coming up housing project, it's a bit of a different story. We did reference the number there for our housing. However, what the extra cost is for home-based business, we haven't quite determined. It would probably be similar to the option 3 amount, but there may be a little bit of synergy there because as part of the housing project, there is going to be consultation regardless, so there's a little bit of efficiency there probably, but also complexity because it means that we need to communicate about more and different topics. So thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So then I noticed that there's no staff time associated with each of these options, and that would be really helpful for me if I knew, option 1 was, a week's worth of work, option 2 is 12 months worth of work, and option 3 is, 2 years worth of work. It would be helpful, I think, to be able to make a decision around that if we knew a little bit more on the staff time that might be involved, because I know that staff time is at a minimum. So that was just a comment. probably don't know how much staff time there is through the chair. Okay, then I will go on to my other questions. And the first one is, in the material, in the report, it talked about tenants being able to run a business if they're renting from a landlord. What happens if the landlord does not want to allow a tenant to run a business out of their house? I know that you can say no pets, for example, in a house that you're renting, or a space that you're renting. Would there be something that would allow for a landlord to say no home business to go through the space that someone is renting?
I did check with the residential tenancy branch, and they did confirm that that is something that they could, that does become part of that relationship, and they could restrict it. Yeah.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Then also my next question would be, they talked about having no maximum size. Like right now, there's a size limit, I think, on businesses that run out of a house, but in the report it talked about having no maximum size. So would that mean that a business could actually therefore take up the whole residence, and then really it wouldn't be a residence at all? It would just be a place of business with no people living there whatsoever?
I mean, currently the bylaw, and certainly staff can jump in, but currently the bylaw doesn't actually establish any kind of maximum area. Some of the other bylaws do from other jurisdictions, and we did talk about that. I mean, the use itself is a secondary use or an ancillary use, so by that definition, it cannot take over the whole home. And also, you know, by identifying or you know, adding a regulation to something that the exterior of the dwelling shall not be, there should be no reflection of the business in the exterior of a home, or it shall not be changed, it certainly allows anybody who's concerned that, you know, clearly it's not sort of spilling out onto the street, or for example.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And what about on one page where it had the list of all of the different options? It was delivery of goods. That's what I was looking at. And how would you enforce delivery of goods at a specific time period? Is that really feasible? I mean, it says in here you could say, you know, delivery is only between 7 and 3, but how do you actually enforce something like that?
Well, I mean, it's a challenge. It is a challenging one, because you can't, I mean, differentiating between personal and commercial delivery in itself is a bit of a challenge. But at least if a business is clearly, you know, permitted to only have deliveries to a certain time, then it's easier to enforce. You know, if somebody is concerned because deliveries are showing up at some horrible hour, then they're able to contact bylaw enforcement and then say, you know, this is happening, and we know clearly that there's not supposed to be deliveries to this business at that time.
Thank you. And I think my last question for now, I may come back to a couple more later. But right now, and this is probably to staff, there's something in the report that says that not all home-based businesses have probably obtained a business license. So my questions would be, how much is a business license? And if a business doesn't obtain a business license and is found out to not have a license, what is the fine for that, not having a license?
That may be for staff.
Thank you, Chair. We're looking up the bylaw to give you insight in that. The second part of the question I can probably answer. So it's a follow-up process. So the business licenses renew at the start of the year. Everybody gets a reminder. Most people pay on time, and there's a couple of people that forget. They get reminders a couple of times, and at the final stage, we visit the outstanding business license holders. So that's also focused on existing license holders and keeping that fresh. Or if their business is gone, of course, then there's no fee. So that's the current process, and Mr. Green is pulling up typical fees. And while he's doing that, they're in the range of, I think they start at about $100. We'll confirm it in a moment, and then the range a little bit up. It might be in the business licensing bylaw itself. So if you give us a moment, we'll pull up the right bylaw and give you more details.
Thank you so much. You can move on to someone else while they're looking
Yes,
for
all
that.
right. Well, while staff are doing that, why will the next speaker is Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to our consultant and our staff. Thank you for the report. I was just wanting to clarify some information, perhaps in some of the comparatives that were used for this report. The lead-in, of course, did point out that small businesses are an economic driver, both provincially and federally. They are a big economic driver. The Government of Canada, of course, makes reference to small businesses by the incomes they generate, and small businesses are, to the Government of Canada, $30,000 per annum in income to $5 million in income. So it can be fairly substantial. And I know that some of the latest economic data that's coming out of certainly real estate information from the Business Council of Canada, certainly the construction industry, we've heard about that lately in provincial legislation, and Stats Canada indicate that in 2022, the underground economy that was not contributing economic benefit other than what is paid perhaps into a local economy for personal use, but the economic loss is estimated to be $11 billion per annum to the province of BC. And it has been prevalent in BC for quite a number of years. I think most of Canada has recognized that because of BC was heavily weighted to small unincorporated businesses and a lot of self-employment. So in the comparative communities, I am wondering, by taking progressive steps to licensing small businesses, is there any evidence that it has stemmed some of that underground economy that is going on that really isn't benefiting certainly local economies to the extent that an established storefront business would?
Thanks. I can't say that the analysis really looked at that sort of distinction between businesses that might not get a license. I mean, what it does speak to, though, is by making it easier for people to get business licenses, then they're more likely to do it. But I think it might be, in terms of the underground economy, and that loss, that economic loss, I don't know exactly what that looks like in, because if somebody's carrying on a business and they're not reporting their income to the CRA, I don't know then, how that plays out in terms of the local economy. I don't know. I can't answer that.
Councillor Patterson?
And just, it was quite curious when I was reviewing some of those statistics. It did say that the two highest underground economic drivers to the underground economy were contractors and consultants, which are also the highest rating in Oak Bay. So, I don't know that it correlates in any way, but it definitely did perk my interest. Also, for the comparative communities, our business community, like the established businesses on Oak Bay Avenue or Estevan Village, part of the economic benefit to the community overall in businesses are that we do set different tax levies.
Councillor Patterson, could I just ask you to focus we'll have time for commentary later, just focus your remarks to questions to staff and the consultant, if you could. Thank you.
So is there evidence in the comparative data that the where they have licensed these businesses, any of the communities have in fact generated a tax levy that might be a different levy than a straight residential tax levy, but perhaps not to the full extent of a business tax levy?
I certainly didn't see anything that indicated that sort of additional tax levy, but what the research did indicate is that, you know, home-based businesses, they can act as incubators. You know, so while they, you know, it might be somewhat small scale, and then, you know, it enables them to grow, and so then they might move on to want to rent some kind of commercial storefront, for example, or you know, another type of property where that would have another tax class. But not specifically where there's an additional tax levy, because that might be seen to be also a discouragement for people to want to apply for their business license, for example, because if it's a small scale operator, they might be inclined to just continue and do their business and not get a business license.
And just to follow up on that, because we are doing some sort of foundational work for our official community plan review, and one of those studies that we are in the process of doing is a retail or commercial study, working with the City of Victoria and Salish, who are also doing the same study to inform their future OCP. So that there is that linkage then between the home-based business review and this retail commercial study, and that may show us whether we need more space or whether there's demand there for more retail space or commercial space, which could then link in with some of the analysis on the home-based businesses that may show actually that there is a need to plan for more retail space or commercial space in some of our neighbourhood cores, or in Oberty Village, or in some of our secondary villages, to help meet that latent and unfilled demand.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
And one thing that I didn't see in here, and I'm just wondering if you could perhaps speak to it, perhaps staff could speak to this, is having licensed commercial vehicles, use of licensed commercial vehicles. Right now, I believe there are commercial vehicles that are used within the district for commercial purposes. They don't have, they're not marked as licensed commercial vehicles. So with the, if we considered implementation of that, would licensed commercial vehicles also form part of what would be considered?
So the definition for a commercial vehicle, I recall as having a number of different criteria, and there was weight, length, I think, and I mean, there could be consideration for that. I'm just trying to think. I mean, because people might be parking their commercial vehicle on their private property or in their driveway, and I'm just at a loss now. I can't remember how that one went. Can you?
So if I can add, Chair, it's not part of our identified or recommended changes necessarily. It is something that currently is regulated. I was looking at the table at the back that Ms. Reynolds did produce, and it doesn't seem to be one of the topics, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not a key piece of a home-based business regulation, because most home-based business regulations don't rely on commercial marked vehicles. Thank you.
Yes, please continue.
Yes, and the last item that I have that I didn't see in the report, so the businesses that we might consider, depending on what option was selected here, any businesses that required health and safety inspections, how is that handled through how this is considered? Does that is that the first step to licensing, or is the first step at the municipality? Just not clear on that.
Well, I mean, I know, different types of businesses are required, for example, to, as an incorporated business, one, even as a home-based business, one is required to have workers work safe, for example. So it could be covered under that. It's not something that local governments typically regulate, though.
Yeah, just to add that, I guess it will be also, the onus is also on the license holder to ensure that they are compliant with other regulations and approvals. For example, some businesses require the approval of Island Health, or those other layers of other jurisdictions would weigh into whether they need their approvals, not just from it's not for the district to then ensure what other approvals that business may require.
So just a follow-up, thank you for that information, but just to follow up on that, so then if the applicant was to come for licensing to the municipality, would they present evidence of that at the time of the licensing, or would the municipality be concerned in any way?
I mean, in the case of, as Mr. Green references, Island Health, for example, when it comes to childcare, for example, that's one where the Island Health requires, they would provide confirmation to the local government that it's suitable, or if there's food production, for example, again, it's something that Island Health would typically, confirm that there's, depending on this, I think it's the scale or the type of food that's being produced, that there's a, proper kitchen, proper venting or so on.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Now I move to Councillor Appleton, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think probably to our guest, off the top, I was interested in the subject that was raised in terms of a class of home-based business, in terms of like the maker class and sort of small scale local production and that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering, I do know that this is sort of a burgeoning part of this type of business, because I know a bunch of people who are involved in it themselves. So how is that treated in other jurisdictions? Like it can involve sort of small scale manufacturing, and there's some, we don't have any industrial land in Oak Bay, but I'm sort of interested in the idea of like small scale manufacturing and these types of operations. So how is this dealt with in other jurisdictions, and how does the sort of the bylaw and the regulatory scheme keep up with sort of the evolutionary nature of that type of work?
That's a good question, because I think it's one that local governments are being challenged with, and because something like that is less suitable in many residential contexts, and that's where you see that in sort of it being that kind of use being permitted in more sort of rural contexts, less in the urban context. I mean, I know there's some makers in some of the small town, in the urban context that are permitted are more those that are less the light industrial type of maker use, but more it could be sort of, I don't know, somebody who's sewing goods or creating goods, but less that sort of the more industrial. But it may be something that is permitted, solely within an enclosed accessory building that has certain setbacks or something like that. But I actually didn't see a lot of I don't recall the bylaws actually really permitting that, because there's such a focus on minimizing nuisance, and that kind of use, it does tend to can create a nuisance in terms of noise, for example, or noise, fumes.
Yes, thank you for that, and I appreciate that, and that also would be my interest, I think that would be the key point from my perspective, is sort of attenuation of nuisance. You know, so you want to facilitate a wide range of potential different uses, and I think that there would be a lot of interesting products that could potentially come out of such a process. But nuisance is a big deal, and you know, just noise and you know and those associated things. So I appreciate that. I think it's something that just collectively, it's more just a sort of a statement for council more broadly. I think that's an interesting one to explore. If council was to explore the option of what uses were permitted and not, there are some interesting uses that have some more complexity to them. Just as far as a second question, I noticed that, I don't know whether this is to our guest or to staff, but agriculture falls in sort of the more advanced or sort of tier 3 type of level of review. And I'm kind of just wanting to explore that a little bit. I'm assuming that it's in that category mostly because we don't technically have any sort of like straight agricultural designation in Oak Bay. So the zoning changes that would go along that would be fairly significant. But I'm just looking to confirm that aspect of things in terms of the complexity of the zoning change required, and that's maybe a question for staff, but maybe a question for our guest, just as a bit of a follow-up to that, are we seeing creative rollout of agricultural food production on lots that are not strictly agricultural in terms of zoning? Is there a way to facilitate a food production for sale facility on a lot, of course, appropriately sized and screened, etc., but that was not specifically designated for agriculture? Would it require a zoning change mandatory, or is there another way that you can facilitate that?
So I can start and maybe staff can add to it. But I mean, urban agriculture is permitted in most of the single family zones currently. And then there's restrictions in the bylaw with regards to sort of the selling of the goods. So, I mean, and what struck me with the bylaw is that, so if somebody was doing it for a commercial, they're potentially limited in size, but somebody who's doing it for personal use, they could use both their front and backyard, for example. That wasn't clear to me there as far as the use goes. But as far as the sale of goods, I mean, you see it in many communities up and down the island, and whether it fits for Oak Bay, but I mean, a lot of people, they just have, you know, is it okay for somebody to have a stand at the end of their driveway to sell their goods, because you see it. It's quite prevalent, up and down the island, and I mean, so would that something like that be acceptable? It would certainly warrant a lot of conversation, I think, within the community as to whether or not something like that would be okay. So I don't know.
We'll turn to Mayor Murdoch, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question in the minor section, sections 4 and 5, it options both the idea of a specific list of businesses as well as in 5 categories of business that are acceptable. I'm just curious, is that sort of suggested that both of those are sort of a list of specifically banned and a list of categories of businesses that are approved, or is there a recommendation there in terms of how that would, I guess, best be structured in a way to kind of be flexible, but make sure that there's regulations in place to prevent unwanted types of businesses?
Sure. I mean, a lot of bylaws in terms of, they clearly identify sort of broad range of nuisance elements that aren't acceptable, that are prohibited, but then speak to some specifics around, let's say, animal care, for example, that, because where it might be, I don't know, something like a kennel is specifically prohibited, for example. So so yeah, being much more specific in terms of those things that are prohibited, but there would also be some general terms to it. But then being more permissive or more broad when it comes to uses that are permitted, creates a bit more flexibility. It's sort of narrowing the scope on the negative types of businesses and broadening on those that are the categories that might be more acceptable.
Okay, thank you. No, that's clear. I just wanted to make sure that was the and as part of that list, as opposed to one of those two approaches would be appropriate. So it sounds like both would be appropriate. It could be used together in conjunction. So thank you for that. And through you, Chair, I'm just curious if there's any jurisdictions that do sort of a simplified or very inexpensive business license, a business permit for things like just, part-time tutoring services or artists and those things of that nature that we might sort of want to make sure are encouraged and have some oversight, but aren't onerous or expensive for those businesses where $100 might be, if they're charging $10 an hour or something for their tutoring services might eat up a lot of that cost.
I mean, something like that could certainly, I think, be an option in terms of the structure, is to create that sort of that tier of less businesses that are less impactful, but encouraging of people to get their business license, because it's certainly useful for the jurisdiction to understand their the types of businesses that are located within the community. And then it can also be helpful, almost like that communication tool where, working, it's another way to communicate with the local businesses within the area, within the jurisdiction as well.
Okay, but you haven't seen those in other jurisdictions in your review?
Well, there's, in terms of those tiers, yes.
Okay. So
Yeah, but nothing specifically, but I mean, you could certainly sort of nuance the bylaw or the regulation to allow for that.
Okay, no, thank you. That's helpful, the tiering model. I appreciate that. Just also curious about, because I think when I was going through this list, particularly the list of possible and not possible, it seems, awkward to try and guess what some of those would be. And are there any mechanisms, maybe this goes to our staff more than the consultant, I'll give it to you, Chair, but is there any sort of mechanism by which people could bring forward something that might not be captured and say, I think this would have minimal impact, I think it's a benefit, and allow it to be tried for a while within the community? I'm thinking you could do that probably through zoning, but that's an incredibly cumbersome and expensive process to go through. I'm just curious if anybody is familiar with any model that would allow for some of that flexibility.
Through the chair, I guess the mechanism that is used is in other jurisdictions is temporary use permits, which is essentially a temporary zoning permission that's valid for 3 years, can be extended for a further 3 years, or can be, after that, 6 years total, can also be extended again. But that is a very useful tool for allowing to see if a business or a certain use works on a particular location or in a particular zone.
Okay, appreciate that. And I'm also just curious if there's any differentiation considered for, I'm aware of a number of just people doing small things out of their house that are used as fundraising tools and so forth, so whether they raise money for charity events or charities or for local organizations. And I'm curious if where does that fall into the business license world? Is that just something that gets done but it's not actually a business? They're just using people might chip in $5 or $10 if they're using something, but does those things trigger business licenses, or are those things that they may have an impact on land use?
Go ahead, Mr. Bull.
Under the current bylaw, those are not considered businesses. So the current bylaw is pretty squarely focused on businesses that operate for profit and make a living out of what their business is. Gives me an opportunity as well to confirm for one of the questions earlier that the business license fee for home-based business is typically $100, which is the base fee for business licenses. There are higher fees as well, but those are reserved for bigger storefront businesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Smart, would you go ahead, please, and then I'll follow you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My first question through you, Chair, to staff is just with regards to the synergies and with option 2, I wondered if you could elaborate a little more on what the sort of public engagement strategy might be for the current bylaw review that this could piggyback on, and just elaborate a little bit more on where there are synergies beyond, say, things like the parking bylaw.
Yeah, through the chair, I think where the synergies are is that for that project we will have a consultant team, probably a bigger firm, I would imagine, because we have to touch a couple of different things, or work more extensively on housing. So that's where there's some synergy. There is already more capacity hired for that project by the time that gets underway. But you raise a good question in terms of the actual consultation. Depending on the other topics that need to be discussed for that project, how easy or inconvenient is it to have it all in one go, or are there is a different engagement strategy needed to maybe deal with specific topics that are included in that project? That's something we haven't thought through just yet. But for option 2, for example, that project needs to come back to council for a project sign-off. So for that project sign-off document, we would have come up with a recommended approach, and then council has an opportunity to weigh in on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to ask about work-live units. There's a current trend right now, especially with multifamily rezonings that are in urban village centers or near urban village centers, to encourage that ground floor units are constructed as work-live units to add to the vibrancy of our community. And I'm wondering how that might relate or not relate at all to this project.
Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, with live work units, the question is: are those home-based businesses? Are those business-based residences? Typically, they're used as a bit of an extension in proximity to maybe existing commercial areas, or sometimes they're used in redeveloping or revitalizing industrial areas. So it's a bit of more of a it's less of a home-based business, I think, usually, in examples elsewhere that I'm familiar with, at least. But yeah, definitely. Let me see. If this topic would be considered further in the context of overall retail or commercial land uses, that kind of a topic could definitely be explored. But squarely within the scope of home-based businesses, under option 1, for example, I would think that's not quite in the scope of the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I wanted to ask staff, the revenue from current business licenses, does it just cover the cost of issuing the license, or does it go to a particular source? And if we're looking at increased revenue from business licenses, is that likely to be a sum of money that could contribute to a specific thing, or really more cost recovery?
Yeah, through the chair, I don't think we have a clear understanding of where that might be. It is part cost recovery and related to the impact of businesses. But what exactly that level might be, or what the revenue implications might be in the context of other district revenues, we don't have that information today, unfortunately. But maybe that's something that could be further explored at a later date.
Well, I think through the chair, I think that's also the approach of the tiered approach, is that you would have the tiers would also be a scale of different business license fees associated with that tiered approach. I know for example, some municipalities who allow short-term vacation rentals, they have a higher fee, and they use that money then to do research through DNA to understand and monitor short-term vacation rentals, or use that funding to actually pay for the analysis and the research to understand how those regulations are working.
Well, thank you. Through you, Chair, again, to staff, or perhaps the consultant, to further on the topic of farm stands, while we don't see those as obviously in Oak Bay, there definitely are some pop-up farm stands that do occur over the summer. And so am I understanding correctly that could be added to the scope of this project as part of the community consultation?
I think possibly, looking at what urban agriculture and sort of the sale of local food might look like in this context, for Oak Bay, that might well be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and through the chair, yeah, we could definitely look at, the City of Victoria in 2016 had a growing in the city where they essentially did a number of zoning and bylaw amendments to their zoning bylaw to allow urban agriculture, including setting regulations for farm stands, for example. So we could sort of have a look at that jurisdiction in relation to how they have gone forward with urban agriculture.
Thank you. Just one final question through you, Chair, to staff. It was just a clarification on this temporary lodging piece that wasn't entirely clear to me whether it really applied outside of the zones it's mentioned in. And if I don't want to dig too deep into it, but I guess I just wanted to understand whether it really applies to the community as a whole. If it could just be elaborated on a tiny bit.
Sure, through the chair. So, we identified it because it was just another reference to short-term rental, and so just thought it was important to raise it or to identify it, that it's something in the bylaw, and while it's somewhat, an isolated and only permitted in one zone, again, it's, having these sort of different, similar uses, but calling them different things, and so a potential area to make the bylaw more clear around that particular use.
Thank you very much. If I may, I just have a few questions before I look to see if anybody's got any second questions, and then I'll go to the public for their own opportunity for input. So yes, I think this question is probably for staff first, if I may. Are there? The focus to some extent in these bylaws we've looked at in our own bylaws is trying to prevent nuisance, and I'm wondering if we have any regulations at the moment that limit or services to the home as opposed to services provided from the home. I'm thinking about the fact that I could ask my piano teacher to come to my house, or my manicurist, or my hairdresser, or any number of people, and it to some extent seems to me has the same effect as having a business in the home. So I just wondered, is there a mirror image of this for services provided to the home in our regulatory framework?
Chair, yes, currently no, there is no regulation like that. No, thanks.
Thank you. As another question, I wondered if, and this is probably for our consultant, Ms. Reynolds, you looked at some other bylaws and you picked them for some reasons, I am sure, but I wondered if you knew off the top if there are any communities in British Columbia that are actually silent on the issue of home-based business, who actually do nothing about it at all and just let their other aspects of the regulatory frameworks kind of in effect deal with the issue.
No, I didn't find any that don't have business license requirements. I can't think of any.
Specifically for home-based activities?
Specifically for home-based, no.
Thank you. A further question. I wondered going forward, if you could just speak to making distinctions around kind of these levels of activity. And in the report, I think it mentions the idea of a commercial workshop as being something that wouldn't be permitted, and how you would distinguish between that and, say, a furniture maker who was doing this kind of as a hobby but could still be selling stuff out of their home woodworking shop, or a seamstress who's, I've used one who worked out of her home or was making drapes out of her own home. Like, would that be, what's the threshold beyond which some activity becomes commercial?
Well, I guess, again, if somebody's, making their living, earning an income, it is commercial. I guess the consideration is, what are the potential impacts to others around them? And that's where, the bylaw currently doesn't, clearly prohibits like a commercial workshop. And it can be, it can often, become one of those enforcement things where, okay, you're making furniture. Well, are you doing that for yourself, or are you selling it? And so it becomes that, matter for enforcement and trying to understand what the individual is actually doing. But it is a bit of a fine line, but certainly it's really trying to manage the use and impacts to neighbors.
So thank you, and maybe I could just turn to staff just to follow up on that. So a commercial workshop would really only need to be identified because somebody was actually making money or producing income from actually operating the workshop, regardless of what they were producing in it. Is that how you would how we would see it in regulation?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, that would be the case. But then there will be that then. And I know from previous experience up in Nelsonich about where there was a business that was that we believed was selling their products, and they claimed it was for their own personal use, and therefore it got very complicated with us trying to produce the evidence and produce the proof for our lawyers to prove that it was a commercial business taking place and not just a home-based business taking place. So it would come down to ultimately what the legal opinions or our lawyers thought of as to how that bylaw should be enforced or how it should be interpreted.
Thank you. And then just one final thing. In the report, as background, you sort of state can provide the policy platform for this in the OCP, which and its references to various things, including home-based businesses. But I wanted to come up a sort of higher level within the OCP. What if we're looking at like livelihood and economic thriving and prosperity? What are the sort of statements in the OCP that speak to that as a sort of more general theme for the municipality, as opposed to the things that are already pointing to specific activities and how they should be governed?
I can't speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we covered some of that in our report. It was in the staff. Do you recall where that went? I saw some sections on that. All right, yeah, so the consultant's report does have a short section on this, and that's where the specific policies and goals are listed. So it's fairly high level, but there's the recognition that home-based business provide services in the community, both for residents to earn an income, but also I think there's reference to the service it can provide to residents in general within the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Are any councillors wish to ask any further questions before I turn to the public? Seeing no hands, I would just thank you, Ms. Reynolds. I just ask you to sort of slide to the side if you could, and then I will invite anybody in the public who would like to come up and speak to us on this issue, the report before us. I see somebody who's been sitting there very patiently, so please come forward. You sit down, turn on the mic, and you just need to give us your name and say where you live, and then you are welcome to speak to us. And am I correct? I have to turn to the mayor now. Is it 3 minutes at this point? It is. And so you would have, and I can be flexible. You're the only, looks like you're the only person, but typically it's 3 minutes. So please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to the home-based business bylaw review. My name's Kristen Richards, and I have been a homeowner in Oak Bay for the past 9 years. I'm also a mother of 2 school-aged kids who wanted to be here, but probably better if they didn't. And I'm a registered massage therapist. I'm voicing my support for non-disruptive, quiet, low-traffic, home-based businesses in Oak Bay. Massage therapy is a quiet business that could be included as a home-based business consistent with music tutoring and music lessons, which is allowed in Oak Bay. There is minimal noise, and massage therapy needs quiet, calm environments to thrive. No deliveries are required for the service. In fact, it seems Amazon delivery vans are more of a nuisance, delivering at all hours of the day and evening than my business would be. Minimal parking is needed for an RMT who has 1 customer per hour or hour and a half. This is the same amount of parking required for a home-based business in Oak Bay who has a full-time employee. allowable in Oak Bay. Or drop off and pick up traffic from a home daycare, also allowable in Oak Bay. Being in a neighborhood, people can walk or bike to their nearest RMT's home-based business, which could decrease traffic and parking issues. The existing zoning bylaw limitations is an unnecessary obstacle when we consider surrounding municipalities such as Saanich, Esquimalt, and Victoria, who all allow RMTs to work from their home with a business license. It's frustrating that just 6 houses down from me on the same street, one could apply to Saanich municipality and work from their home as an RMT, but I'm not allowed in Oak Bay. As a small business owner, I'm at the mercy of commercial rentals and landlords that can often squeeze out profits that we make to invest in our homes and our communities. Working from home offers me and my family more stability, flexibility, and savings, and this is worth considering. Mayor and Council, I ask for an even playing field when it comes to quiet, single customer services to work from their homes in Oak Bay. Now is the time to choose, I think it's tier 2, from the regulation review. And as my 10-year-old daughter suggested I add, I hope this speech makes your decision easier. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. We appreciate it. Is there anybody else out there? I see one gentleman sitting there. No, you've come along for moral support. Good. Thank you. You're welcome to, sorry, please do come forward and you can properly take the chair and have your time. So thank you. Welcome.
Rob Richards, resident of Oak Bay, wife of the person you just heard, husband of the person you just heard. I just want to say thank you. I know these topics are not simple and you're balancing a lot of considerations and, you know, whatever you decide is right for the community, but I appreciate the time and effort and due consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Well, Mayor and Council, that takes us to the point at which we get to have some discussion and help focus our thinking about how to proceed. Before I do that, I think I will just formally ask for receipt of the staff report. So we've dispensed with that. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, seconded by Councillor Appleton. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And thank you, staff, for the report. So as you can see, the staff have sort of packaged up 3 sort of different tiers approaches to doing this, sort of low contact, more effort, and then more major review. And it would be interesting to have our comments around that approach and other comments that you think, or also whether there needs to be some completely different option entirely. So I think maybe I could just start a speakers list and ask for input with respect to how you see the different options and how best to move forward. Councillor Appleton. Oh, Councillor Braithwaite.
Sorry, I just did want to talk a little bit about parking because that seems to be one of the biggest issues, I think, around the home-based businesses. And as the speaker who just spoke, Ms. Richards spoke, there's certain businesses that don't require a lot of parking, but with all of the new regulations that are coming in around our new housing, things that we have to do, and we as a council collectively decided to limit the number of parking spaces required for new homes and for new residences. I fear that if we don't do something about parking around small businesses or home-based businesses, that we might run into a few issues. So that's kind of where one of my main concerns is around parking. And I understand that, as Ms. Richards says, some businesses will only have one person coming to every hour and a half. But it's the businesses perhaps that have more people coming that would be a little bit of a concern for me. And I think it's best to list what's allowed as a business, not what's not allowed, because it's hard to say, you know, you can't have, you can have this, but you can't have that. Like if I wanted to run a vape shop out of my house, can I do that? Well, probably not. It's probably not something that we really want to see happen. But so I think it's easier to list what is allowed. And signage is the other big thing that I have a question around, because I've been working with staff a little bit about bringing a motion to council in regards to limiting the number of signs allowed around elections, for example. And so I don't want to see our community littered with large signs. So I would really like to look at how to figure out something with the signs that we would be allowing or not allowing. My other questions would be, can we charge more for businesses that have more customers? That might be a question that we might want to look at. And I would like, if we're going to go with short-term rentals, I would like to be more in line with the province with the 90 days. There's a table on page 19 of the consultant's report, page 29 of the staff report, and it has table 1. And I would like to see parking required on that chart, added into that chart, just because I think that would really help us know if it was a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, and what parking would be required with that. So those are just a few things that I would like to flag, and I'm sure other people have other things.
Can I just ask a question procedurally, Councillor Braithwaite? When you raise these issues, are you just asking that they be inserted into the options, or because you're concerned that they're not there as part of what would be studied if we picked, say, option 2 versus option 3?
I think I'm just bringing them up to see if other people had those concerns also, and then once we figure that out, then we can put them into what would be option 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we're gathering up ideas and thoughts of issues that we think are of importance, and I've got a speakers list. I saw Councillor Patterson's hands first. There may have been one over here, so I will start with. I've got Patterson, Murdoch, and Appleton. Yes, and so go ahead, please, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I too had some of the same things as Councillor Braithwaite. I guess overall I'm concerned about our approach to this, only in that I know that we've been undertaking public consultation on quite a few issues as of late, and there can be a fatigue. And so and I know that following the housing bylaw changes that we have to get into the OCP. So obviously this will come up in all of that, whatever choice we make tonight. But certainly with the housing, if you could have potentially 4 units with 4 vehicles and 4 signs, I tend to agree with Councillor Braithwaite that it's hard to comprehend that right now. But for me, other things that I simply want to ensure, perhaps, or taken into consideration, is a business that requires outdoor storage or has physical impacts like noise, dust, smoke, vibration, or odor. So it's not limiting uses, just the outcome of those uses on perhaps adjacent neighbors.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then I'll turn to Mayor Murdoch, please.
I think Councillor Appleton actually had his hand first, so then I'll go.
Thank you, Chair. I just, in terms of, I appreciate my colleague's interest in sort of speaking to some of the details of the potential options. So in this case, I will seek to test the will of council, and will move that council direct staff to proceed with option 2 for home-based business regulations as outlined in the report titled Home-Based Business Regulations Options, dated June 17, 2024.
Seconder. Okay. Thank you. We've got Councillor Braithwaite seconding. Thank you. Would you like to motivate, Councillor Appleton?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just with respect to what and I appreciate all the information that's been provided and the way that the options are laid out. I think initially when I was approaching the subject of home-based businesses, and we did talk about this some time ago, and I appreciate staff's continuing to bring it back in action as they have time. This is actually potentially more information and more detail than I was originally anticipating would come back when this report did come back, so I really appreciate it. It has in fact sort of altered my perception of what needs to be done with home-based business, because my initial approach was to take a fairly light touch and provide the housekeeping amendments that would allow us to have just a more defined regulatory framework. Some of the data that's included in here in terms of the scope and the number of folks that are running a home-based business in Oak Bay and how much different it is in Oak Bay compared to adjacent jurisdictions, I think really is significant. So in this case, I favor option 2 because it allows for us to explore the option, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, defining what is and is not, or preferably what is acceptable, some additional uses that I think would not detract from what we would expect in a residential environment in Oak Bay. Option 2 also specifically speaks to combining with the ongoing housing work that staff is going to be occupying the majority of staff's time over the next sort of 18 months. So I think that speaks to, it allows us to address some of the concerns that have already been raised. I think if you integrate that discussion with the housing component, then you have better integration with concerns, as was raised, say parking. You can have those two conversations at the same time and make sure that they synchronize. Deliveries, these types of things, and as well as the consultation piece that was raised by Councillor Patterson. Consultation fatigue is a real thing. So if these two things can be, those two conversations can be combined, I think that's really great. But with the nature of housing by regulation changing in Oak Bay, I think that people are going to be looking at their properties and evaluating what different options they have in front of them as far as how they're going to reside on that property and what they're going to do as far as their home base. They're contemplating a home-based business. So I think that the land use changes that we're contemplating through the housing work really dovetail nicely with evaluating home-based business, because it talks about how you're going to use your property and what the potential for your property is. So I think this is probably the best option in my opinion moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a live motion on the floor. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Go ahead, Mayor Murdoch. Council, I've demoted him.
I'll take the demotion as long as I get to speak. Thank you, Chair. I actually will support the motion as it's put here. I was thinking of a slightly different approach I was going to suggest, but I'm comfortable with this. I guess what I don't want to do is delay some of these minor suggestions in option 1, if that's possible. So I guess the question I have on this is if we signal this direction, there's still a few minor pieces like the definitions and these sorts of things that are in option 1 that can be possibly worked on in the intervening time. I'm just curious if everything would be included in this one, or if some of these minor, which required only targeted consultation, could be advanced if the opportunity arose. So through your Chair to staff.
Yes, please, staff. I was curious about that too. Thank you.
Thanks. That's not quite how we set up the options. I think from our perspective, because if option 1, it falls in the category where there's also other council direction that needs to be actioned at some point. And with option 2, it becomes a part of a bigger project. I think our recommendation would be to make a clear choice, because doing option 1 and 2, even though in option 2 we could include the minor changes for sure, but if we are asked to also immediately action smaller changes, then I can't quite articulate which other items that you might have asked for before would be left aside for that, but that would be the consequence. So it's not impossible, but there are consequences to that kind of an approach. Thank you.
Thank you. So then, speaking to the motion, I'm still supportive of it. Excuse me. Largely because if I look at those minor amendments, I don't think they move the needle particularly far. They are essentially, really are minor, and so. I think we're still better off looking at the larger and more impactful approach contemplated under option 2. I do think, though, if this is going to go forward, I'd probably do a motion arising after this that also just asks that we look at maybe I'll just ask the question, actually. I think it may already be in the process. We have a OCP review process underway that's required by the end of 2025 to address the housing. But I understand there's maybe some other minor OCP amendment updates coming as well. The temporary use permit, which is currently prohibited within our official community plan, I know we've had this discussion a number of times on issues as they've arisen. Is that something that is contemplated for coming back either as part of the 2025 OCP review or perhaps another OCP amendment process before then.
And please, Director Bull.
Thank you. I heard Mr. Green confirm that he intends to include it in the scope for the OCP changes for the housing one, right?
In the 2020, in the December 14th or December 11th council report with the project background, it was included in that scope of the OCP review of temporary use, but the two consider temporary use permits.
Thank you. And that's the one that's due at the end of 2025, just for my clarification?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, so my last comment on this then, I'll keep it short, is that I think that is a required piece. I think we need to have a way of considering impact of some of the innovative things going on without perhaps going through the full consultation process and the sort of full resolve. So I do think that is an important part of our overall piece. But I think given the weight of the different options here, I think going with option 2 and undertaking this process as part of the larger housing and other discussions going on is probably the best way to go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Councillor Green, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for this very detailed presentation and report again. I actually think option 3 might be the better option because it covers off some of the points that the Mayor just made. I would like to support option 2, but I think option 3 provides a broader scope and still meets some of the expectations that many of us have identified. And so I would, as I say, I would like to support option 2, but I think option 3 might be a better option. I also like the reference to the childcare issue in option 3. We know that's a big issue in the community. We've heard about that loud and clear. So I would like to support option 2 because that's also a great option, but I think 3 is a much more comprehensive approach. It connects a lot of the elements in a better way, I think. And I'm really concerned that we don't isolate this particular project from the other projects that are related, such as the housing, and that we involve key partners. I think the BIA is not just the public. They are a key stakeholder and partner with the municipality. So I think it allows us for more in-depth consultation as well. So I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not supportive, but I think option 3 is a better option. Thank you.
And then Councillor Braithwaite, please.
Thank you. I did want to speak in favor of option 2, and the reason I'm in favor of option 2 is really for the both the timeline, the cost, and the synergies, and just really getting out of the way of our residents having the kind of businesses from home that they want to, and to not have residents feel like they're doing illegal activity in their homes. So I'm looking forward to having these conversations with the community, and I see that option 2 is going to get us there sooner, and I would even potentially be in favor of anything that could move this along in the meantime, if there's a temporary use permit or almost staff delegated option to allow for some of these, straightforward, low impact uses in the meantime, almost as a pilot project. I would be very open to that as well, but I will be voting in favor of option 2.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much. I do like option 2, but I really hear what Councillor Green is saying about option 3, and I wonder if I could ask staff what would be more quickly implemented, option 2 or option 3? Do we know?
Yes, please, Director Bull.
Yeah, through the chair, that also allows me to clarify something that I think was a little bit unclear perhaps, but between option 2 and 3, the scope is the same, so it covers all these options in the report, so that's not different. But the difference, of course, is freestanding versus rolling into a housing topic. So the short answer to what the timing would be, option 2 is earlier because that project is already planned. And for option 3, it depends a bit, but we would come back to you later this year, look at other potential new council priority projects. But the reality is we already know that 2025 is spoken for by housing. So that's where likely that project would be if you were asked me today, we would probably recommend or outline options for you to do that at a later date. Thank you.
So the short answer is option 2 would be implemented sooner than option 3. Thank you.
Any other speakers before I say anything? Councillor Patterson, didn't see your hand. She's quiet. You're all right? You're good. Go.
Yeah, I was leaning towards option 2, but I am very cognizant of the fatigue that is existing in the community with so all of the changes happening, and I'm concerned, I guess, with option 2, and perhaps staff could clarify this. If we do it as part of the zoning bylaw, how we approach that with the community so that they fully understand the context of what it is that will be the end result of the dynamics within the community that will arise from the changes in the provincial housing targets that we need to meet, and the impact of this. If we had just proceeded with the housing in full the way that we had intended to, instead of the way we were mandated to, I think it might have been a bit easier for the community. But we've really been requesting an amazing amount of input from them, and what I'm hearing from the community is they're somewhat overloaded, and they're missing pieces of those communications. So I'd like to hear from staff that if we proceed with option 2, how do we ensure that we connect with the community in a meaningful way so that they understand it's a housing discussion and the home-based business discussion?
Thank you. Through to Mr. Ball, please.
Yeah, thank you. And as the questions are asked, we are trying to come up with some answers. So I think that needs to be detailed further because it's definitely a bit more, it adds complexity, as I mentioned earlier. But one of the ideas that we would be thinking of is focus groups. So it's clear what topic is being discussed. There could be focus group type effort on specifically this topic, maybe more conducive for people, that are specifically interested in that topic. But we would like to think that through a bit more comprehensively and come back with options for you when the project sign-off is presented later this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to say a few things before I call the question or ask for any last time speakers before we call the question. I will vote to support option 2 just because I would like to see something move forward. I have to say that philosophically, I'm really actually opposed to home-based business regulation. I think that lots of things go on in the community that we don't need to say anything about, that we're kind of used to this activity, and that we're going to spend a lot of time on looking at what people can and cannot do and making these fine detailed rules, when in fact, if we did nothing at all, the sky would not fall, and that we have another part of our regulatory framework which deals with the nuisances already. And so in my view of the world, we actually would not have a set of rules for this at all, and we would respond to those nuisances as appropriately, and we would then open up the community to thrive and survive and get on with each other without having to nitpick, in my view, through a whole bunch of stuff that probably doesn't really matter. It's part of why I asked the question earlier about whether we regulate services that are provided to the home, because a lot of what's provided to the home is exactly what's provided in the home in these businesses. And we don't do anything about that at all. We just let it happen. And we're quite content with that. We don't regulate how many visitors to a friend's party can come, how many kids get dropped off, all sorts of activity around us in the community. We're completely silent on and we're accepting of. It's part of living in an urban area. So I'm philosophically opposed to this whole thing, but that's so counterculture, it's not going to go anywhere. So I will be voting in favor of option 2. Any further last time speakers before I call the question on the motion before our switches to go forward with option 2? Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you. I just going to say, Chair Watson, appreciate the candor on that one. I'm not quite as far as that. I think there's a reason that people pay higher taxes in commercial centers because we provide additional parking and other things that sort of facilitate some of those pieces. And I think without any regulation, but I do agree, I think, philosophically with the core of what you're saying, which is as we go through these regulatory changes, I do think a lighter touch is absolutely appropriate. I think that, you know, right now, a lot of different home-based businesses are innovating and are in place, and it doesn't bother anybody. And I think that, you know, I think our primary concern here is that, yeah, we don't want a retail store popping up or other things that are more appropriate for you know, commercial centers. That being said, I think most home-based businesses, as we define them, work just fine with very minimal touch. And it's very clear from the cost recovery, if it's $100, we're not doing a lot of services for that. So I just wanted to reflect back on your comments, that I think there is some justification for having some regulation, but I think your broader comments about the light touch and the impact side of the equation is a really good one. And I think as we go through this evaluation piece, I think I'm looking forward to some of the options that come back, and how we approach that. Thank you.
Thank you. I then saw Councillor Green's hand. What would you please join the conversation?
Thank you,
and
Chair.
Patterson, thank you.
Sorry. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief, just to say that I don't want to overwhelm the community either with a lot of consultation. That's number one. I also don't want to overwhelm our staff, particularly in this department. They are going full bore on the housing project. It's huge, so I think we have to be mindful of that we don't overwhelm them. The capacity is an issue, and financial responsibility is an issue down the road. I will support option 2 because it gets the ball rolling, no question. And I appreciate the difference and the similarity between options 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, please.
Yes, thank you. And I will I will not support option 2. And the main reason is that I don't think the focus groups will speak as well to the community as a broader consultation. And also I certainly appreciate the candor of the chair in expressing opinions, but that hasn't been my personal experience with businesses, with home-based businesses. And so having experienced it differently and feeling that there are other members of the community that may want to also express that, I won't support option 2, but I understand certainly council wanting to move on this.
Call for any final speakers before I call the question. Seeing none, we have a second motion on the floor, which is to move forward, direct staff to move forward with option 2. And so all those in favor? In favor, Smart, Braithwaite, Watson, opposed? Councillor Patterson opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And I think that then concludes item 7.1 for the evening. So thank you very much, staff, and Ms. Reynolds for your hard work. So I can move to the next item on the agenda, which I think is any new business. So this is a call for any non-land use issues that might be new business. I'm seeing nobody raising a hand. Thank you. And so then finally, a motion to adjourn, please.
Move adjournment.
By Braithwaite?
In camera.
Okay, sorry. So yes. So I will need help with this because I know what we're going to do next, but what is actually the process? I finish this meeting or I adjourn to in camera? Just adjourn. I just need a motion to adjourn this meeting. Okay, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Appleton. Great. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you. Carried.